There he is, Larry Elder, Republican candidate for president, author of a fabulous, fabulous new book. We're going to talk all about it. But Larry, good to see you. This is live. So you're here with me now, and we're reacting to this news that we got from the NAACP. Don't go to Florida. Florida's a bad place because apparently it's quite racist. What's your thought on that?
Trish, don't get me started on the NAACP. Last year, they had their annual convention, and there were four things that they were concerned about. The first was reproductive rights. Now, I'm pro-life, but however you feel about that, how is that a civil right? The next one was student debt relief. Again, however you feel about that, how is that a civil right? I happen to oppose the idea of people who never went to college forgiving the debt of those who did. The other one was voter suppression. Including voter ID. Well, here's the problem. Majority of blacks support voter ID. And after Joe Biden referred to the Georgia laws as worse than Jim Crow, their Jim Eagle, whatever the bleep that meant, more black Georgians voted than ever before. The last one was police brutality, the lie that the police are engaging in systemic racism against black people. Studies have shown the police, if anything, are more hesitant, Trish, more reluctant to pull the trigger on a black suspect than a white suspect. And by calling the police systemically racist, you've caused what's called the George Floyd effect. And that is the police pulling back from their proactive policing. And as a result, there have been studies that show thousands of people who are now dead, who otherwise wouldn't be dead, most of whom are black, if the police were engaging in their normal proactive policing. So this is what the NAACP concentrates on. They omit the 10,000-pound elephant in the room, Trish, which is the epidemic of fatherlessness. 70% of black kids today enter the home without a father in the home, married to the mother. This is ignored by the NAACP. And the poor, abysmal performance of our urban schools. 85% of black eighth graders, these are 13-year-old blacks, Trish, according to the nation's so-called national report card, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, 85% of black eighth graders can neither read nor do math at grade level. 50% cannot do basic math, basic reading. So a large number of black 13-year-olds are running around the country, Trish, functionally illiterate. And the NAACP wants to boycott Florida because the governor of Florida does not want white kids taught that they're oppressed and black people taught that they're victims. Scotty, beam me up.
I mean, look, you are, first of all, I'm just going to, again, great to have you here. I mean, it's crazy, this whole live thing. So bear with me on my tech front, but it's wonderful to see you. And the viewers should just know, Larry and I go way back. We were both at Fox together. I'll have to ask you about that. But now Larry, who ran for governor, and by the way, California sure as heck could have used you, Larry, because look at the trouble they're in now. They were foolish. They've got Gavin Newsom in the slot. And we all know, and this is part of what your book is all about. It's called So Goes California. Let me see if I can bring up the cover. We all know the trouble that they've gotten themselves into. Now you're running for, as goes California, now you're running for president of the United States. And I think, you more than anyone have just cut through to the reality, which is that, you got to have sort of the basics, right? You got to have a mom and a dad and a shot. And part of having a shot, and study after study, I've talked about this with you in the past, shows that those that have a successful financial future, the one common ingredient, this is amazing to me, the one common thing is that you see right across, it transcends everything. It's when you grow up with a mom and a dad, you got a two-parent household, and somehow that's sort of the make or break. So I know you feel pretty passionately about this, right? You can't just hand out money like California wants to do. What are they talking about? 350 grand all the way up to like 1.2 million for every person who's a relative of a slave?
And that's why I'm asking people to read my book, As Goes California. You can order it right now on Amazon or on Barnes & Noble. Obama wrote a book. His first book was called Dreams from My Father, a very good book about the angst that he felt not having his biological father in the house. The last time he saw his biological father, he was 10 years old. And Obama said a kid raised without a father is 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. Now, the question we ought to be asking ourselves, what the NAACP ought to be asking, is how have we gone from having 25% of black kids entering the world in 1965 without a father in the home married to the mother to 70% today? Are you prepared to say America is more racist today than it was back in 65? The answer is the welfare state, Trish. We've incentivized women to marry the government. We've incentivized men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility.
No, it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem, and you've articulated this so well. It came at a particular time in history, right? In the 1960s, if we go back, all with very good intentions, like all these things. It's the law of unintended consequences, as we like to talk about, right? Certainly in economics. I mean, people wanted good stuff, and they wanted to be able to ensure that everybody had an equal shot, but it kind of had the reverse effect, Larry.
Absolutely. When I grew up in the 50s and the 60s, virtually every single one of my friends had a mother and a father in the home. Today, that's the reverse. And that, again, is the number one problem facing this country. The large number of kids, it's 40% of all American kids, Trish, enter the world without a father in the home married to the mother. Half of Hispanic kids, 25% of white kids. And you look at, I've got a good friend named Tom Sowell, Walter Williams. They both told me this: unless there's somebody in the house who has made sure that you've been fed, been clothed, been housed, make sure you've done your homework and have gone to bed on time, you are in deep, deep voodoo. And the NAACP keeps ignoring that problem, and they focus on racism when race has never been a less important factor in American life. America is the only majority white country that's elected a black president and reelected one, even though Barack Obama presided over the worst economic recovery in American history. Racism has never been a less significant factor. The way to escape poverty, both the Brookings Institution on the left and the American Enterprise Institute on the right, these two think tanks, give the same formula to escape poverty. First, finish high school, one presumably where you can read, write, and compute at grade level. Number two, don't have a kid until you're 20 years old. Number three, get married before you have that kid. Number four, get a job. Don't quit that job until you get another job. And number five, I would add, avoid the criminal justice system. You do those things, you will not be poor in America.
Yeah, kind of a basic sort of plan, guide to success. And yet, NAACP, I mean, I highlighted it and everything because I'm just blown away by this. I guess the goal is they want to hurt Florida because it relies on tourism, but, they picked the wrong time of year to do it. By the way, I'm going to Florida on Thursday. I'm heading down to Palm Beach. Why not? I'll show my patronage there for the state. They say, please be advised that Florida public schools will not teach your children accurate African-American history, which includes a history of enslavement, segregation, racial injustice, and systemic racism. So I guess that's part of it, right? The systemic racism. Larry, yeah. I grew up in New Hampshire. I think I've told you this before. So I grew up in New Hampshire. So, there was no, you couldn't be, this is a weird thing to say, but you almost couldn't be racist, right? Because there was no group other than, we're all kind of the same. And people might think, oh, well, that makes you that. No. It actually, I think by the time I was, in an academic enough environment and I was in a very diverse, multicultural community, everybody, I never had a preconceived, this is weird to say, but maybe if you grow up in LA and you're okay, I don't go to that bad neighborhood or this or that or the other. You just growing up, we didn't really ever have any of these preconceived notions. And my whole goal has always been to just see you and the person, right? You never want to see, oh, that person's Asian, that person's African American, that person's Hispanic. The goal should always be to almost see through to the person themselves, right? Including I don't care if you're blonde or brunette or pretty or ugly. Hopefully our goal as human beings is to see through all that. And certainly it was the goal of Martin Luther King Jr. And yet I feel nowadays, because everybody's walking on eggshells and everybody's so terrified, and this really kind of came to fruition in those dark days of the Black Lives Matter riots, et cetera, in 2020. I feel now it's oh my gosh, it's all you can see. You have to see it. And if you don't see it, you're going to be in trouble. Now, how sad is that for America?
It is sad, and I blame a lot of that, Trish, on Barack Obama. I was in 2004 in Boston when he gave that rafter-ringing speech introducing John Kerry. There's no blue America, there's no red America, there's no black America, there's no white America. There's just one United States of America. The man won with a little more than 52% of the vote. Third week of January 2009, he walks into the Oval Office before he signed any executive order, before he signed any bill. His approval was at 70%. Why? It isn't that all of a sudden people who didn't vote for him said, you know what, I want my taxes raised. I want Obamacare. No, they felt at the very least he would pierce the notion that America is systemically racist. And what did he do? When he entered the Oval Office, both blacks and whites thought race relations would get better. And then we go from The Cambridge Police acted stupidly. If I had a son that looked like Trayvon, to saying that racism is America's DNA, to embracing Black Lives Matter, to embracing Al Sharpton, had him in the White House over 70 times. Had Eric Holder, his AG, referred to voter ID, which blacks support, as an example of pernicious racism, to the point when he left Oval Office, both blacks and whites thought race relations got worse.
Yeah. I mean, what a shame.
Trish, my father never knew his biological father, so it's not a death sentence. Born in 1915, Athens, Georgia, Jim Crow South. His illiterate mom threw him out of the house at the age of 13, literally dirt poor. And my dad ended up cleaning toilets when I was growing up. He started a cafe when he was 47 years old. That's 20 years longer than the average person who starts a business. He saved his nickels and dimes. And when my dad retired, he owned the property where the cafe was, the property next door to it, plus the home we have still in our family. So my dad had a net worth of a little bit under $1 million. An eighth grade dropout, black boy in America. That's what can happen in America.
No, yeah, I mean, and that's why
the Civil Rights Act before the Voting Rights Act, before Brown versus Education, blacks kept moving forward. In 1940, 87% of blacks lived under the poverty line. 20 years later, that number had fallen to 47%. That's a 40-point drop in 20 years, the greatest 20-year period of economic expansion for blacks in American history. Why? It was rare for a black kid to be raised without a father, a belief in Judeo-Christian values, a belief in hard work and entrepreneurship, and a belief in patriotism, even if America was not living up to its values as applies to black people. And now today in America, you have Haitians lining up, Trish, for a lottery to get into a country that's systemically racist. It's nonsense, and it's hurting the very people that you claim that you care about.
Well, and it is so political, and I want to get to that in a second, but I'm just going to tell you like a brief aside. What you just said is so important and so powerful, and this is what's lost, right? You know, I had a grandfather, by the way, who didn't finish the 7th grade, but wound up becoming the Secretary of Education in New Hampshire, because you know what? Like it happens. Like this is part of the American dream, and all his kids went on to great stuff, and you know, this is what we want, right, for our children, and it was important to me as a kid to hear all those stories. As I think, Larry, it was really important to you. Here you are running for president of the United States now. Here you are, just such an enormous success, such a positive thinker. And I firmly believe, without getting too, mystical here, that positivity is so critical. And we're losing that. Like, that's not what kids are taught. Instead, they're taught, well, you need a handout because your ancestors hundreds of years ago were enslaved. Okay, yeah, no, that was bad. Like, look, lots of populations have gone through challenging times. And I do believe that the Black population in America had an extra challenging time, obviously, because of all that. And we all feel bad about it. But you know what? You move forward, right? And part of the success is, I grew up in the Jim Crow South and I did this. Or I was even thinking back what you just said about how you were taught to be patriotic, even when the country wasn't even living up to its standards. I have a background in classical music, and I was recently listening to some recordings. I'm going to play them one of these days on the show, of Marian Anderson on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial from like 1937. This was a woman who grew up poor in Philadelphia, somehow went to integrated schools because they had those somehow back in 37, I don't know, wound up studying music, had this enormous, incredible voice, sang all over Europe, was a superstar, and then she came back and the Daughters of the American Revolution didn't want her to sing at Constitution Hall. So she said, you know what, I'm taking it to the people. And she did this amazing concert for 50,000 people outside the Lincoln Memorial. And she sang, "My Country 'Tis of Thee. Right. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I love." And it was that patriotism, again, like loving her country despite what she was up against, but also knowing, Larry, she could overcome it. She could Absolutely. Go direct to the people.
Absolutely. And Trish, I'm in California, and as you know, the reparations panel has suggested that every Black Californian get $1.2 million. A big problem, of course, California was admitted as a free state. So they get around it by saying, well, it's not about slavery. It's about mistreatment. It's about grievances. It's about redlining or over policing or mass incarceration. Well, there were laws that prevented Japanese Americans from owning farmland in California. And of course, they were put in relocation camps. There were laws that prevented Chinese Americans from competing in the laundry business in the Bay Area. Fast forward, the average household income of a Chinese American, the average household income of a Japanese American is higher than the average income of a white American. Why? Belief in strong families, belief in hard work, belief in embracing education. That's what you should be telling Black people today. Instead, you're telling them that you're victims, and somebody who did nothing to you is owed something. You are owed something from people who did nothing to you.
So the
I've called
reason for
reparations.
that,
I've called reparations the extraction of money from people who were never slave owners, Trish, to be given to people who were never slaves.
interesting, right? Yeah, no, I'm like, look, my ancestors weren't even here way back then. It's just, it's insane, and it's going to create more of a wedge.
7 generations ago, and you're telling me that right now I'm suffering because of what happened 7 generations ago. And again, the real commonality, the whole approach to the reparations panel is to close what they call the wealth gap. Well, the fatherlessness gap is a much bigger factor in the wealth gap than any of this stuff that you're talking about. And the failure of our public schools to educate kids is a much bigger factor than any of the things that you're talking about. But the NAACP does not support school choice. By the way, Florida does. So you have school choice in Florida, but the NAACP is telling Black people not to go there, where Florida is giving you a better chance to get a good education than, say, places like California.
You cited some important statistics as we started this about kids not being able to read, kids not knowing basic math. I did a story years ago for Network News on this. It's in New York City, this exact issue. They just pass them along, Larry, because no teacher wants to deal with it. And so they just get passed along grade to grade, and there's nobody checking to make sure that they really can read, write, add, subtract. And it's just a horrible, we're setting these kids up so poorly. And you look now at what happened during March 2020, and Neil Gorsuch is out with a really scathing indictment, the Supreme Court justice, talking about how this was just such a massive overreach in terms of, almost a totalitarian, my words, not his, totalitarian sort of state, right? And who are the kids that lost out the most, Larry? Because those were the schools, am I right, in the inner cities across America that are run by all these union advocates and liberals that are most disadvantaged now.
Yeah, Black and brown kids were already behind, and now they're behind another year, or in California, almost 2 years in math and in reading. And the proof is in the pudding, Trish. There was a study some years ago where public school teachers, I call them government school teachers, were asked where they put their own school-age kids. Nationwide, around 10% of families have their kids in private school. Around 6% of Black families do. 49% of Philadelphia public school teachers with school-age kids put their own kids in private school. In Chicago, it's 39%. So the people who know the school system the best, teachers, aren't putting their own kids in it. It's the equivalent of opening up a restaurant, putting up a sign saying, "Come on in, eat the food." We sure won't.
Now, I'm looking, by the way, at some of our viewers who are just joining us right now. We are talking with Larry Elder, candidate for president of the United States. He's out with a brand new book, As Goes California. You can pre-order it right now. Go to Amazon, As Goes California. He has a lot of thoughts on the importance of policy and how it affects the entire country. And I know he's extremely disappointed, as are so many of us, at the state of things right now. But I wonder, look, you look at the polls, and we can talk about DeSantis. We can talk about Tim Scott, too, who actually, I look at it, but aside, Larry, and I'm like, the Republican Party seems pretty darn diverse. You've got yourself, you've got Senator Scott, you've got Nikki Haley, you've got, Vivek Ramaswamy. You have a very multicultural group. I kind of am troubled that they keep going back to the well. But is it not true that this is one of those things that just kind of gins up support? I guess if you don't have real policies, Joe Biden doesn't. Let's be very clear. He had no economic international policies that were really going to take us in a new direction. So what, you go back to race?
Well, that's right. He's underwater on inflation, underwater on the economy, underwater on virtually every single issue. And what he's going to do is run against Donald Trump. I watch a lot of CNN and MSNBC, Trish, and my girlfriend and I say, okay, what's the over-under on how long it'll take MSNBC or CNN to bring up Donald Trump? And generally speaking, it's around 90 seconds. And that's one of the reasons I'm running. I'm asking people to throw something in the tip jar at elderforpresident.com. We, meaning Republicans, are of two minds about Donald Trump. There are those who love him, and there are those who love what Donald Trump did as president, but don't love the possibility that he might lose in November against Joe Biden. Now, I don't know what to do about Trump derangement syndrome. Maybe someday they'll develop a vaccine. But I ask people to answer the following questions. Have you lost friends because of Donald Trump? Are you no longer speaking to coworkers because of Donald Trump? Have you have a strained relationship because of relations, because of relatives, because of Donald Trump? And the answer to that is yes, yes, and yes. And in my case, it is. In the case of most people I know who voted for Donald Trump, the answer is yes. Then Houston, we've got a problem. And the problem is swing voters, particularly suburban moms in swing states. Now, the question is, if you love the American First agenda, and I do, and you agree with most of the Donald Trump did, and I do you want somebody who is palatable enough, likable enough, knowledgeable enough, with enough sense of humor, so a sufficient number of swing voters can vote for him so that we win in November 2024? If that is your analysis, I'm your man.
Look, I agree with you on the policy front. Some of the best policies I have seen, and you know, I'll start with the tax policy. Let me just say, I read every tax policy, including, you know, I remember Senator Crude had a dense one, and he had a VAT tax that the Europeans use buried deep in there. But listen, I thought the tax policy was outstanding, and what was so great about that was you actually saw what happened? Oh, our economy grew. And by the way, this is important. This is interesting. When you look at minority groups and average middle Americans, they actually saw the most increase in wages and overall household income adjusted for inflation, more than they had ever seen in decades and decades. It might have been the largest in history. And so it shows you that, you know, you put the right policies into place and you can have really good outcomes. I mean, his mistake, frankly, and you know, I'm well on record for this one, was shutting down the country like he did. I mean, that actually played, I think, in some ways right into the Democrats' hands. But here's another question, because they go after you too, Larry, and they're going after DeSantis. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. What is this NAACP thing happening at this time for? Oh, well, DeSantis is also expected to announce that he's going to run this week. So they're trying to say that, okay, he's racist, he's awful. They've said the same stuff about you. And I kind of look at it and say, wow, like this is just, they're going to go to this. I mean, maybe some people play to it more than others. Maybe Trump didn't play to it enough. Maybe he was just too tough and was like, okay, you know, buddy, bring it on. But you have to expect that, right? And do you expect that? You've already gotten it.
Of course, the LA Times called me the black face of white supremacy. And another LA Times reporter referred to my views as white supremacists. That's what they do. They take the knife and put it in the mustard jar of racism and spread it over everything and anything they can. Why? They want to get the black people angry and believing that America is systemically racist because they need that near 90 to 95% monolithic black vote without which they cannot win. They don't want blacks to start thinking about crime or about educational policies or about whether or not they're competitive in our workplace. They want black people to think of themselves as victims. And we, by the way, we Democrats wear the white hat in that battle. And these SOBs over there, those Republicans, they wear the black hat. That is their narrative, and it is insulting. And that's one of the reasons I'm running for president, to shatter that ridiculous narrative that's hurting the very people that the Democrats purport to care about, mainly black and brown people living in the inner city.
What do you think about the landscape thus far? I mean, Donald Trump, he's in there and he's way ahead. And I get your point on the challenges that he may present as a candidate at the top of the ticket. But what about everybody else in there? I mean, any thoughts one way or another on the rest of the candidates, including, by the way, Scott, who just announced?
Well, you know, Trish, I don't feel I'm running against them. I feel I'm running for this job. I'm auditioning for this job. Mm-hmm. If you like the Donald Trump policies, if you like the way the borders were secured in a way more secure than ever in our history, you like the way the economy was going, lowering regulations, lowering taxes, as you pointed out, supporting somebody who's pro-life, pro-school choice, who's going to put on conservative justices, but you fear that because of Trump derangement syndrome, that a sufficient number of swing voters would not vote for Donald Trump if he walked on water. If that is your fear, you need an alternative. I am that alternative.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's an exciting and it's a very positive message that you give. Going back to the book for a second, As Goes California, what has been the biggest, I mean, why has this failed so miserably? I remember Gavin Newsom, like back when he was married to Kimberly. It was like, you got to go back like 20 years or so. It might have been around 2000. My husband and I had just moved to California. We kind of caught the tail end of the tech hype. And I nicknamed it, it was San Francisco. I nicknamed it Sucks Francisco. Because I just was like, you gotta be kidding me. Like this place, come on. Like the Beta Breakers race. I remember I was working at the local TV station and like we were in the edit booth and someone said, well, make sure you don't see any body parts, you know, because you can't put those on. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Oh no. they run naked. And I'm like, where the heck did I just move? But it feels quaint, actually, what San Francisco was back then to what it has become now. Gavin Newsom was the mayor. He actually ran on a whole platform of getting the homelessness out,
Right.
under control and getting the homeless off the streets and taking that money and putting it into programs for them because he saw this correlation between the handouts and like an hour after the handouts, what do you know? The rates of emergency room visits would skyrocket because people would overdose. And it kind of was like, all right, well, that makes sense. Nothing makes sense anymore, Larry. What happened?
Well, over time, what happened is that California became completely governed by left wingers. Our Senate now, supermajority Democrats. The Assembly, supermajority Democrats. There hasn't been a Republican elected statewide office in California in almost 20 years. So you name the cockamamie job-killing proposal, they're going to pass it. The tax hike, they're going to pass it. We've got a reparations panel. We've got all these rules and regulations that allow bad guys to remain on the streets. We have cashless bail. We have a situation where the average price of a home in California is 175% above the national average. Why? Because the Democratic Party and the environmental extremists are in bed and virtually any construction is stopped. So we're underdeveloped by over 1 million housing units. That's the primary reason that people cite when they leave California.
It's terrible. It's like a recipe of what not to do. And so you need to make sure that, we're not doing that on a national scale. And yet we are, right? To your point about, okay, let's go and, wave a magic wand and forgive a bunch of Perkins loans and other student loans to the tune of $10,000, $20,000 because somehow it's somebody else's fault that didn't go to college and didn't take out those loans that you can't pay them back. I mean, this lack of responsibility, that's not who we are as Americans. It's not who we were, certainly.
Every dumb idea in the country has already been tried in California twice. We passed laws that reduce sentences for people that assault police officers. That is now a non-violent offense. Serial arson is now a non-violent offense. Rape of an intoxicated victim, now a non-violent offense. When you make it easier for bad guys to be on the street, easier for bad guys not to be convicted, not to go to jail, crime goes up. They may be criminals, but they're not stupid. And that's another reason why people are leaving. And our schools are near the bottom of all 50 states, even though half of the California budget is on automatic pilot and goes to education. We're spending more on K through 12 than ever before. And you're quite right. When Gavin Newsom was mayor of San Francisco, he promised to end homelessness by the time he left term. He served 2 full-time terms. When he left, homelessness was worse. He served 2 full terms as lieutenant governor of California and sat around complaining he had nothing to do. I suggest you go back to San Francisco and complete the promise that you made the people in that city to get rid of homelessness. And of course, he didn't do it. No. And now our problem is even worse here in California.
No, it's a terrifying prospect because our edge, our success, right, has always been based on, one, the belief that you could do better, right? That American opportunity, the American dream, which is so unique to this country, really and truly. You talk to anybody else from around the world, you look at the people lining up at the border, we know why they want to come here. It's their shot at the American dream. And to squander that or to say, it doesn't matter anymore, to not be as competitive as possible is really, really and truly a shame. Let me ask you about some other stuff that's going on. I mean, you're talking about crime. You look at what's happened in New York City, for example, where I used to live, and I'm very thankful not to live there anymore, but it's a mess. And there's another woman, I guess, who just got out of critical condition. She is still in critical condition. They're in the hospital in New York City after having her head banged in to a train while just waiting for the train early in the morning to go to work. We've got the Daniel Penny case that people are weighing in on. I mean, obviously extremely sad that the man died, but also sad, can I point out, that an average American, I mean, he happened to be a Marine, but anybody would be put in the spot of having to protect themselves like that. I mean, what are you doing to society when you say, okay, we're not going to have enough police? And by the way, the police, you can't do your job. I mean, it kind of puts the burden on the individuals, and we're seeing more and more evidence of that.
Trish, there is, however you feel about the way Jordan Neely died, there is zero evidence that what motivated Daniel Penny is Jordan Neely's race. Just as there's zero evidence, however you feel about what Derek Chauvin did to George Floyd, that Derek Chauvin was motivated because of George Floyd's race. In fact, the lead prosecutor was a black man who in his opening statement said the police in general are not on trial. The Minneapolis PD is not on trial. This individual is on trial, and he never argued that Derek Chauvin was motivated because of George Floyd's race, and Derek Chauvin was never charged with a hate crime. There were 10,000 homicide victims, black, in the year 2020, almost all of them killed by other black people. A young black male aged 10 to 43, I'm not making this up, is 13 times more likely to be murdered than a young white male of the same demo. And almost always the murderer is another young black male. But we don't get upset about that. Just this past weekend, 21 people were shot in Chicago. But you let a white man put a chokehold on a black man, and all of a sudden, let's march on Albany. It is ridiculous. It is, again, don't look at the real problems facing black on black crime stemming from the lack of fathers in the home. Let's talk about the rare instance in which there's an interracial black white death. And by the way, in the last several years, there've been about 750 black black homicides. 500 white people have been killed by blacks, even though blacks are just 13% of the population, and 250 whites have been killed by blacks, even though whites are 61% of the population. And you look at whether it's homicides or serial killing or mass shootings, whites underrepresent that category compared to their percentage of the population, and blacks overrepresent. Roughly 60% of all of the homicides, the shootings, and the robberies in America are committed by black people, even though blacks are just 13% of the population. We don't talk about
with Larry Elder. Yeah, he's the author.
Joe Biden doesn't talk about that.
It's true. I just want to give your book a plug for everybody tuning in right now. We are talking with Larry Elder. He is the author of As Goes California. You can pre-order it right now on Amazon. Larry is running for president of the United States of America. He's very passionate about the changes that we need and the need to kind of get over this division, right? Like this insane division. Let me ask you about something else, because you were a radio host for many, many years and then got into politics, but they're going after AM radio right now. This is an interesting policy one. I mean, I know there's a lot of conservative talk on AM radio. You get some liberal talk as well. One of the things I like from a security perspective about making sure that every car, even the new ones, the fancy new ones that you can plug your iPhone into, that they have radio, AM radio, is because, I don't know, like if anything really goes bad, and I hate to think that way, but you kind of need it, right? You really want to have AM radio. It's the reason why hopefully most people have an AM radio somewhere in their house that you can battery up, because that might be your one source to communicate with people. What's your take on AOC and some of these others that want to make sure that AM radio is gone for good?
Well, you know why they want it gone, because conservatives dominate AM radio. If liberals dominated AM radio, we wouldn't have this conversation. I think there are all sorts of commercial reasons why, if I were an auto manufacturer, I would leave it in. And as you pointed out, there's safety reasons for it as well. But I don't believe there ought to be some sort of law forcing auto manufacturers to put AM radio. I think if I were a manufacturer, I would stress that my car has AM radio as a marketing advantage over those that don't have it.
Yeah, then that makes sense. I hear you, because it's that sort of free market aspect. Let me take a dive into Florida again with DeSantis, just in light of what you just said. He's in this battle with Disney, and it's getting a little bit ugly. And a lot of conservatives, and I know that my viewers don't necessarily agree with me on this. Look, I'm no fan of Disney. I don't like what Disney's done. I don't like how they're trying to force feed us stuff like Bud Light. But nonetheless, they're an independent company. And if they want to make stupid moves and stupid decisions, then guess what? We're not going to go see their movies, right? Well, they've taken on DeSantis in this really kind of ugly way. I'm all for him in terms of his bill that the liberals label "Don't Say Gay." I mean, it's ridiculous. It's like, let's just not talk about things that little kids don't need to talk about yet. I mean, they can barely process anything. Why would you even go there? It seems just exploitive and treacherous to bring kids into these conversations that are pretty hard for them to grasp. But, he's under all this pressure. So now it's getting kind of nasty with Disney. What do you think of that? Like, is he overstepping his bounds in your view?
Well, all I know is we criticized AOC when she was criticizing Amazon and caused Amazon not to put a facility in New York City that cost them a great deal of jobs and a great deal of taxes. Yeah. And I would be worried about doing the same thing regarding Florida.
Yeah. Okay. Now
especially
I'm
After Florida already fired the executive. They got involved in the so-called "Don't Say Gay" bill, and the old CEO became the new CEO. He admitted they should not have waded into those territories. So it seems to me that I would be worried about jobs and tax revenues. That said, what DeSantis wants to do is hold Disney to the same standard as every other corporation in Florida. So I'm really kind of agnostic on this battle. I would just be careful not to cost Florida jobs.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think that's a smart and good approach. You know, they need those jobs, but simultaneously, they don't. It's not fair if Disney gets certain advantages. I mean,
Right.
I know how much you care passionately about helping all Americans achieve more and seeing the success in education. If you were elected president, what would be sort of your number one? You go in there, and what would it be? Larry, I mean, like, what is it that you want to sort of do and check off right away, first day?
I think the first thing you can do right away is to reverse the anti-oil and gas policies that Biden put into policy, and that's because every single good or service that we have in this country is affected by energy and about the ability to deliver this energy. Excuse me, the ability to deliver that good or service to other people, and that requires cheap oil, cheap gas. I would greenlight the Keystone Pipeline. I would allow drilling on federal property. I would reverse the anti-fracking policies and get us back to energy independence. That's the first thing that I could do that would have an almost immediate effect.
That makes a ton of sense. So you're looking forward to some debates?
Well, one of the reasons I want people to go to Elder for President, Trish, is because I'm going to have to raise a certain amount of money in order to qualify for that first debate in Milwaukee in August. And once I get on that debate stage and people hear me, hear my backstory, hear my ideas, see that I'm likable, sense of humor, and I'm a dazzling sex symbol, I think it'll be game over. So I really have to get to that debate stage in August. So
Elder
please
for
help me.
President. Okay.
Elder.
Elderforpresident.com. And also his book. Hey, I noticed Candace Owens wrote your sort of the prequel, if you will. She wrote a little chapter in the beginning. She has just gotten, well, like you, badly attacked for saying a lot of things that, I think are actually very American, right? In their roots, about just believing in oneself and never thinking that you're the underdog because of these external factors. How'd you get close to her? Just curious.
Well, she calls me one of her mentors and credits me with changing her from being a liberal Democrat to being the conservative that she is. And by the way, I wrote the foreword for her book called Blackout. And so she returned the favor by writing the foreword for mine. And she's getting the same kind of grief that I'm getting. Any black conservative gets it. Benny Thompson, the chairman of the January 6th committee, publicly referred to Clarence Thomas as an Uncle Tom. Nobody said a word. You can call a black conservative everything but a child of God. That's not a problem. But you wound the feelings of a liberal. And oh my goodness, they refer to illegal aliens as undocumented. They refer to people in California who are homeless as unhoused. But it's perfectly okay to refer to a Republican who's a conservative as right wing. And any lifelong Republican who's voted Republican over and over and over again, as I have, is referred to not just as a Republican, but as a Trump Republican. Why? I wasn't going to vote for Hillary or Joe Biden, but I'm called a Trump Republican. The reason the media does that is because they know that much of the country dislikes Donald Trump, and it's sort of a pejorative, puts you in a category so you can sneer your nose at this person and not vote for him. It's incredibly unfair.
It's incredibly unfair and incredibly un-American, and it's not right, and it has to stop. And I'm really worried about our nation. So I am so glad that you are out there sticking your neck out. I know it's not easy, and you take a lot of heat, but thank you for doing it, Larry. And I encourage everybody, Larry, the Elder for President, Larry Elder, author of As Goes California. Go check out his book. You can pre-order it now. Thank you, my friend.
Trish, it's my pleasure. We've got a country to save. God bless.
Sure do. Thank you.